One of the very most important wakas to the Inca would have been the ancestral royal mummies. In South America, throughout history, there has been a belief in continuation after death and the ability for the dead to communicate with the living. The dead were often intentionally well preserved and provided with grave goods, and this always helps us to understand that there's a belief in continuation. Okay, so how do the mummies communicate with the living? Well, it would be through dreams, through signs, and through interpreters. The royal mummies indeed did have interpreters that accompanied them so that you could find out what the idea of the ancestors was actually at that moment. The Inca did take this incredibly seriously because the mummies of the ancestors visibly made clear the right of the living Sapa Inca to rule. It was clear evidence of the ruling heritage. It was a family tree smack dab in front of you. The Inca ancestral mummies were often kept in the Coricancha, that great temple that was sheathed in gold, but they would have been brought out for festivals and for feasts. They were clothed, they were fed, and they had their own interpreters. There were records of mummies that were actually sent on diplomatic missions to represent the Sapa Inca. Okay, now you send the interpreter along, and the interpreter can explain too the foreign power that you're communicating with, what the will of the mummy, or in this case, the Inca representative actually is. One of the royal mummies was actually married to the mother of a Sapa Inca to justify his right to rule. Okay, his mother marries an mummy which comes from the royal line, thereby technically making that mummy, that royal Inca, his father, and increasing his claim to the throne. Mummies were consulted on really important questions, and the reason for that is that they provided us with a link between the world of the living and the world of the dead, the world of the physical and the world of the spiritual. They were brought out to attend weddings. Of course, you're going to want them at your wedding because they represent essentially the family and the lineage. They're going to be at harvest festivals, and they might even go in place of the Sapa Inca to attend a battle. The process of mummification in Peru was varied. Sometimes it was very complex, other times not quite as much. We do know that for the Inca, the internal organs were removed, the body was embalmed, and the figure was placed in a seated position. Unfortunately, we do not have any of the royal mummies that survive. As far as we know, they were ultimately destroyed by the Spanish. What we do have are manuscripts written in the 17th century approximately by someone of indigenous descent who had a great respect for the Inca and their traditions. His name was Pomo, and in the two images located on the right side of the screen, you can get a sense of the way in which an ancestral mummy would have been very carefully carried on a litter from place to place. You can also see the seated position that the figure's in. We do have earlier mummies that have survived that we can get a chance to look at, and that would include one in the upper left hand side of the screen, which is much earlier than the Inca, but it establishes the continuous tradition of mummification. It's a mummy bundle. It was found in the regions of Lima not that long ago, and it shows in fact that there's actually a head attached to the bundled body. The Chachapoya, which is located in the middle upper portion of the screen, gives you an idea of what would be inside that mummy bundle. So it's kind of a universal, as far as we can tell, tradition throughout the Andes to prepare the dead for the next life, often using the process of mummification to ensure the continuation of the physical form. This is a description by one of the Spaniards when he saw one of the royal Inca mummies. Let me just read it to you. He was so impressed at their lifelike quality. Okay. Their bodies were so perfect that they lacked neither hair, eyebrows, nor eyelashes. They were in clothes such as they had worn when alive. They were seated in the way Indian men and women usually sit, with their arms crossed over their chests, the right over the left, and their eyes cast down. I remember touching a finger of the hand of one Kapak. It was hard and rigid, like that of a wooden statue. The bodies weighed so little that any Indian could carry them from house to house in his arms or in his shoulders, on his shoulders. They carried them wrapped in white sheets through the streets and squares, the Indians falling to their knees and making reverences with groans and tears. In other words, respecting the mummy very much as one would respect the living Sapa Inka. There is another form of mummification that occurs in the Andes, and I'm going to call this naturally preserving the body, or naturally preserving the body by freezing. And this references in particular the practice of human sacrifice in the Andes. The Inca did engage in human sacrifice, but it was very, very limited, particularly if we compare Incan sacrifice to Aztec sacrifice. The Inca tended to engage in human sacrifice in emergency situations or very, very extraordinarily important events, such as when a new emperor would take the throne, or if there were a period of illness or of drought in the land. And then it became necessary to make an offering to the gods to see if there was nothing that could be done to improve things. The young person chosen and the human sacrificial victims in the Peruvian world were usually small children. The earliest age that I have is around the age of 8, 9, going up into the teen years. These folks were carefully selected, and then they were given special honors, ceremonial feted, essentially, given attention and taken on a pilgrimage throughout various villages before they would actually be taken up to the highlands and eventually to the mountain peaks where they would permanently reside. Prior to death, they were going to be treated with great feasts, lots of food, and corn beer, and given great honor. And I'm going to stress killed humanely. I recognize that most of you are going to be disturbed by the fact that these are young people and frequently actually small children. But I would like you also to be aware that they were treated with honor and they were treated in death in a humane way. They were given either coca leaves or perhaps corn beer to make them not feel pain as they literally would go to sleep and freeze to death, or they were very quickly dispatched with blunt force trauma. The image that we're looking at is probably the most famous and recently discovered, one of the most recently discovered of the mummies and the sacrificial victims, located on a mountain top somewhere around 20,000 feet by a crazy archaeologist who is also a mountain climber. His name is Johann Reinhard, and this is a very well preserved mummy, somewhere around 1440, so we're going to say roughly around, interestingly, around the time of the contact period, and she was between 12 and 15 years of age, perfectly preserved in terms of being frozen. And it's truly an astonishing find that gives us a lot of information about the Inca. You can also see top middle of the screen some of the materials left with her, additional sacrificial offerings. This was taking the offering to the god, to the mountain, and leaving it there in hopes of a good return. In other words, this would have been done in time of a particular need by the Inca. Let me conclude with a couple remarks about the blending of indigenous faith in the Andes with Christianity, which comes in with the conquest. We can see evidence of this even today continuing. I have a couple examples up on the screen, and we are fairly clear that although we often make the comment that the Spanish conquered the New World and destroyed the civilizations that had existed there, that's a really big exaggeration. What happens is the Spanish bring in a new religion and it blends with the indigenous faith, and there is a mingling and a mixing. The images help us to see this, I think. What you're looking at top left is an image of Mary. This is a depiction of the Virgin Mary, an important figure within the Catholic Church. She has been painted, this is an 18th century depiction of her, as Mama Pacha, as Mother Earth. And Mama Pacha, worshipped at the time of the Inca, worshipped in the 18th century, and still worshipped in Peru today, was conflated with Mary, literally mixed with Mary. Okay, how do I know this? Well, in part, if you look at the image right here in the bottom region, this is a modern depiction from Peru, and it is Mama Pacha. And if you take a careful look, you're going to see she is indeed a mountain. She's shaped like a mountain, but she has the waters of the mountain running from her, and she's wearing a mantle that appears to look like the snows of the peaks of the Andes. If you take that shape and you overlay it in the image in the top left of Mary, you're going to see that she also has been portrayed in a very traditional Andean way as a mountain. She is literally Mother Earth, and she's placed as a peak between the other mountain peaks. Yeah, I have one last example, and that is for the sun, Inti. We've already looked at him in the lower right. That is a depiction, an early depiction in the Andes of a sun figure. It was a mask that could have been worn. I'd like you to see all of the rays of the sun coming out and extending from it. That shape and the use of gold accompanying it will be adopted by the Church when it comes to Peru for purposes of displaying the Eucharist, the wafer within Christianity that the Catholic Church believed represented the body of Jesus. By doing so, it allowed the newly initiated Christians to mingle and blend, pulling from their past belief system into the new system of Christianity. It allowed a comfort level for the new converts, blending and mingling, just as has continued in the New World today. The indigenous beliefs, the practices of the ancient Andean world, at least many of them, survive well into the 21st century.